Welcome to Aprendamos Español, the second lesson in the intermediate course. In this lesson, I am going to teach you how to say would in Spanish, as in I would do this or I would say that. I will also teach you how to say would have in the sense of I would have done my homework or she wouldn't have said that to me. I'm going to teach you the formula for how to say would and would have in Spanish, and the irregulars for the conjugations, and then we're going to practice with some examples. Now, in order to fully understand my lesson, it helps if you already know all the pronouns in Spanish and you already know about verb conjugation. And as a bonus, it's also helpful if you already know about the direct object, indirect object, and reflexive verbs. But those will be for another lesson. But let's get started by just teaching you how to form a would statement in Spanish. So in English, it's pretty simple to make a would statement. You just take the word would, and then you add it in front of your verb, and then you're done. For example, when you make this statement right here, I would eat. All you really did was you took the word would and put it in front of your verb, and there, you were done. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, in Spanish, you don't really need a separate word to form the thought would. All you do is take your verb and then you add endings to the verb in order to let you know that that verb is in the would form. And I have drawn a 6 box right here of the different endings that you add to your verbs. It's ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, and ian. And if you notice, there are 6 of these because these all correspond to the personal pronouns in the Spanish language. If you have a verb that you're saying that you would do, but you're saying I would do it, it's in the yo form, it would be ia. Okay, so this is in the yo form. Ias is in the tu form. Ia is in the el, ella, usted form, which means he, she, or you formal. Iamos is in the we form. Iais is in the y'all form. It means you all informal. It's from the pronoun vosotros, which is mainly used in Spain. And ian means they would do something, or you all formal would do something. Let's take a verb and I will show you exactly what I mean. Let's take the verb comer, all right? Comer meaning to eat. So let's draw our 6 box. So we already have the verb comer, and so all we really do is just add these endings in order to get our conjugation. So comería, just adding that ending, means I would eat. Then there's comerías, meaning you would eat. See how it's the same ending? You're really just taking the verb and slapping that ending on there. Then there's comería again, which means he or she would eat, or it could mean you would eat formal. Then there is comeríamos, meaning we would eat. Then there is comeríais, meaning y'all would eat, but it's informal. It's like you're talking to a group of friends. And then finally, there's comerían, meaning they would eat. Or it could mean y'all would eat formal. But do you see basically how you form a would statement in Spanish? All you really do is add these particular endings to the verb itself, then you're done. So this would is in the I form. This would ending is in the you form. This would ending is in the he or she form, and so on and so forth. So there's no need to take an extra word that means would and put it in front of the verb. In Spanish, you just add something to the ending of the verb that's called conjugation to let you know that it's a would statement. Pretty simple enough, right? Well, as with most conjugations in Spanish, you do have your irregulars. And so here is a list of irregular verbs that when you put them in the would form or otherwise known as the conditional tense, that's something very important to know. When you put a verb in the would form, that is the same thing as calling it a conditional tense verb. So would and conditional pretty much mean the same thing. So pretty much get used to that because you're going to be seeing a lot of it in the Spanish classes to come. So in these verbs, you don't just take the verb and slap the endings after it. You have to change the spelling of the root of the verb before you add your endings. So here I just have the yo form of the verbs and the tu form of the verbs, but if you notice, these endings will follow the exact same endings as I gave you in the 6 box from the last page. So let's look at all these verbs. Caber, meaning to fit. Cabría, meaning I would fit. Cabrías, meaning you would fit. And so on and so forth. All the endings follow the same pattern. It's just that it's not cabería, it's cabría. You drop the E. And so it's important to pay attention to these spellings when it comes to this list of verbs here. Poder, meaning to be able to. To say I would be able to is podría. It's not podería, you drop the E. It's podría. You would be able to, podrías, and so on and so forth. Poner, meaning to put or to place. It's pondría and pondrías, and then pondría, pondríamos, pondríais, pondrían. You get the idea. Querer. Notice here you add an extra R. It's not quería, it's querida. Okay? So pay very close attention to the spelling for these irregulars. Okay? For saber, meaning to know. To say I would know, sabría. Remember, this is another example where you're dropping the E. It is not sabería, it's sabría. Okay? Salir, meaning to leave. When you say I would leave, yo saldría, not saliría, it's saldría. So pay very close attention to the spelling of these irregulars. And this is just pure memorization. Once you memorize this root, then you can pretty much put it in any form you want, whether it's the yo form or the tu form, because you will already know those endings. Now, tener, meaning to have. To say I would have is not tenería, it's tendría, tendrías, and so on and so forth. How about valer, meaning to cost or to be worth? It's valdría, meaning I would cost, alright? Venir, to come, vendría, vendrías, and so on and so forth. And you understand what I am getting at here. Decir, it means to say or to tell. In order for you to say in Spanish, I would tell or I would say, diría, not deciría, it's diría. So be very comfortable make sure you're very comfortable with these irregulars. This is the overwhelming majority of them, and once you memorize these, you're pretty much okay for your irregulars for the conditional tense, otherwise known as the would form in Spanish. Now, hacer, meaning to do or to make. When you say I would make or I would do, haría, not hacería, haría, or you would make or you would do, harías. And now we come to a very interesting verb known as haber. And haber basically means have, but it does not mean have in the way that tener means have. These are two very different verbs. Do not confuse them. Tener means have in the possessive sense, like if you were to say, I have $3, or my brother has an Xbox, or something like that. This is possessive have. Haber is past tense have. This is like when you say, I have finished my homework, or she has taken out the trash. You get the idea? That kind of have does not mean possession. It's just used to express something that happened in the past. And that is what haber means. When you take the word have, haber, and put it in the would form or the conditional, you are forming the statement would have. So when you take the verb have, the past tense have, haber, and put it in the would form, that's how you say would have. But we will come back to making would have statements in a moment. But for now, let's give some practice examples here of how to form the conditional tense, otherwise known as the would tense or the would form of the verb. Okay, so as you can see right here, the first one, it has we would eat. So remember the formula that I taught you. You take your verb, in this case the verb is eat. So let's just take our verb, comer, because we know we're going to need comer because it is the verb here. Now we know that because it is a would statement, we know we're going to have to add one of those 6 endings. And remember, the endings that I showed you were ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, and ian. Remember, I showed you these 6 endings. These all mean would, but which would do we need? Well, it's obvious. We need the would that is in the we form. What is we in Spanish? Nosotros. So we need the ending that is in the nosotros or the we form, and it's íamos. So the statement is comeríamos. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Comeríamos means we would eat. And this is one of the things I find beautiful about the Spanish language. This is one word, and it means all 3 of these words in English. That's what's so efficient about the Spanish language. Now let's move on. I would make the pizza. What verb do we need here? Well, we know we need the verb make. And we know that that verb is hacer. But if you recall, hacer is irregular. We don't just use hacer. We have to go back. Remember, the root becomes har, ar, okay? So hacer becomes ar. Now, again, what form of the would ending do we need? We need the one that corresponds with I, and that's ia. So haría, and then the pizza is just la pizza. Okay? You might be wondering why I have cursive Z's here and printed Z's here. I don't know. Let's move on. They would sing. They would sing. So what's our verb? Our verb is sing. Our verb is cantar, meaning to sing. And then we need a would ending, and so we have them over here. Which would ending do we need? We need the one that corresponds with they. So ian, cantarían. They would sing. Pretty straightforward, right? Now let's move on to the final one. He would say it. So we know that the verb we're working with here is say, and say in Spanish is decir. So do we just slap the ending on? Are we done? Absolutely not, because remember, decir is on this list of irregulars. We don't just put deciria, it's diria, dirias, and so on and so forth. So we know that our root now becomes dir. Now, which would ending do we add to it? The one that corresponds with he. So it's just diria. But as you can see, we have this word it right here. The word it is known as the direct object in Spanish. And whenever you have a word like it or to them or anything like that, you put it in front of your conjugated verb. So this just becomes lo diría, okay? Meaning it, he would say. But the way you would translate that in English is he would say it, lo diría. And now we are done with forming our would statement. So with that out of the way, now I would like you to just practice that on your own until you become comfortable. Make sure you have these irregular verbs memorized and what they turn into when you make a would statement with them, otherwise known as the conditional tense, and just practice making statements on your own. Now, without further ado, let's move on to the would have statements, okay? So a would have statement is like if you said, she would have helped me, or I would have said this. Now, in English, your format is very simple. In English, you just take would, then you take have, and then you take your verb, and then you're pretty much done. Like if you say, I would have eaten. Okay, and I'm using the verb comer, I'm using the verb eat because it's very straightforward. It's not that complicated. But you notice how this is not just eat, this is eaten. This is known as the past participle, okay? Anytime you have to put have in front of it, like I have said, they have done, we have spoken. Anytime you have the word have in front of it, that form of the verb is known as the past participle. And that is important because you need to know that to know how to form it in Spanish. Do you remember how I told you that haber means have? And this is basically what the root verb is here. It's haber, okay? And in the would form, this is I would have, you would have, he or she would have, we would have, y'all would have, or they would have. And of course, I'm simplifying this, but you understand what I am basically saying here. You take the verb have, put it in the would form, and you have the statement would have. But then to say you're spoken or eaten or whatever you have on the end, that is known as the past participle. If you look at the free sample I give you where I teach you how to speak in the perfect tense, you'll know that your past participle is your form of the verb that ends in ido, ado, hecho, or icho, or so on and so forth. Take decir, for example. Decir means to speak. Its past participle is dicho, meaning spoken. Like if you say, I have spoken. Or hablar, hablar means to talk. Its past participle is hablado. Like if you say, I have talked. Or just another simple example, hacer. Hacer means to do. Its past participle would be hecho, meaning I have done. So that is what your past participle is. It's spoken, done. It's the form of the verb that you would put after have when you're speaking in terms of a would have or a have statement. So basically in Spanish, what you just do is your verb for have is already in the would form. All you do is put your past participle after it. So let me give you some examples of this. So it says, we would have sung. So again, remember, the verb have here is what's going to be put in the would form. So what verb is have? That's haber. But do we just say haberíamos? No, this is irregular. Remember, I already gave you the 6 spots here for all the different forms of haber. So it's helpful if you write that down and commit it to memory. So this just becomes habríamos, which means we would have. And then for the verb sung, it comes from cantar, which means to sing. But since it's an AR verb, you put it in the past participle, cantado. Habríamos cantado. We would have sung. So notice it's in your ado ending. How about they would have run? Okay, so we know that haber is the verb have here, so we know that's what we're dealing with. But haber needs to go in the they would form. So it's habrían. Run is the verb correr, and we know that it is an ER verb, so it's going to end in ido for the past participle. So it's habrían corrido. They would have, and then run as your past participle. And then finally we have, we would have talked to her. Now this one is very interesting because we've switched from a more common verb. We've used, now we're using talk, hablar. And typically here, to say talk to someone, that's the interesting part, you would say with that person, not to that person in Spanish. So your verb have here is haber. We need the we would form, so it's just habríamos, which means we would have. It's have in the we would form. Habríamos talked is hablar, so it's just habríamos hablado con ella. Okay? We would have talked to her or with her. Okay? So now that you understand how to form these statements, that your verb for have is already in the would form, so you don't need to mess with putting extra words in there, and then you just take your past participle, and then you're pretty much done. But there are some special situations, some special rules that you need to make sure that you understand when using the conditional perfect tense. That's what this is called, by the way. And let me just clarify for you, and let me write it in a box down here, because it's very important. Okay, would is known as the conditional tense, okay, whereas would have is known as the conditional perfect tense, okay? And why I have some letters randomly capitalized, just to make it more interesting. But would, when you're making a would statement, that's known as the conditional tense. When you're saying what you would have done, that's known as conditional perfect. And that's a very important distinction to make going forward. So let's move on. So when you're dealing with reflexive verbs, and I know that you should already know what a reflexive verb is. A reflexive verb is something you do to yourself, like these verbs here. Irse, dormirse, and lavarse. We're going to take these three and we're going to conjugate them all in the conditional tense, which is the would form. And then after that, we're going to conjugate them in the conditional perfect tense, which is the would have form, just to make sure you understand the rules. When you have a reflexive verb and you're putting it in the conditional tense, your reflexive pronoun goes before your conditional or your would verb. All right? So let's look at these three examples here. Irse. Irse means to get oneself out. Like if you say, I'm getting out of here, that would be me voy. Okay? You would just take the reflexive pronoun and put it in whatever form is the form of the person who's doing it, and then you would conjugate the verb as well. So let's take a look at this. We want the yo form of irse. So we want it in the conditional tense. So what does conditional mean? It's would, of course. So we want to say, I would get myself out, or I would get out. So the first thing we do is we take our reflexive pronoun, which is say, we put it in the yo form, which is may, and then after that we take our verb and put it in the conditional. Our verb is ir, and so what is the conditional yo form of ir? It's just iría, okay? Me iría, which means I would get myself out, okay? I would get myself out. Me iría, all right? Why? Because ir is put in the I would form, because we need I would because it's conditional and it's in the yo form, all right? So this is pretty much like math. You're just taking all the pieces of the equation, putting them together to get your answer. Pretty straightforward. How about dormirse? Now, dormirse means to fall oneself asleep. That's what it literally means, but it means like when you doze off or when you fall asleep. We want it in the tu form. What does tu mean? It means you. So we want to say, you would fall asleep. So the first thing we do is we take this reflexive pronoun, say, we put it in the tu form, which is te. Then after that, we take our verb and we conjugate it. Well, we know we need the tu form of this verb, but we need it in the conditional, so we need the you would form of this verb. So it's te dormirías, okay? Te dormirías, which means you would fall asleep, or you would fall yourself asleep, or saying like you would doze off. Te dormirías, you would fall asleep. Now lavarse. Lavarse means to wash oneself. Like if you say, I'm going into the bathroom to wash my hands or something like that. We would take our reflexive pronoun, put it in the right form. We know we need the ellos form, and the ellos form of say is just say, okay? Then we take our verb and conjugate it in the conditional tense, or whatever form we need in the eos form as well. So se lavarían, okay, which means they would wash themselves. I'm running out of room here. They would wash themselves. Notice how the ending of the verb has to agree with what kind of reflexive pronoun you choose. This is in the yo form, so you choose me. This is in the tu form, so you choose te. This is in the eos form, so you choose se. For a reflexive verb, the conjugation has to agree with what pronoun is being used. But you get the idea. When you have a reflexive verb, always put your reflexive pronoun in front of the conditional verb. Now, the rule for that is pretty much the same thing in the conditional perfect or the would have form. And that is, your reflexive pronoun always goes first, then you put your conditional form of haber, which is your would have word, and then your past participle. So it goes reflexive pronoun, then your would have statement, which is haber, then your past participle. Let me give you 3 examples. We're going to use the same exact verbs as up here to keep it consistent, to make sure you understand what's going on here. So, irse, meaning to get oneself out. We're in the yo form again, so this time we're not saying I would get myself out. We're in the conditional perfect. We're saying I would have gotten myself out. So the first thing we do is we take our reflexive verb, our reflexive pronoun, put it in the right form. Here we know we need the yo form, so that's just me. And then we take our conditional form of haber. Now, what form of the verb do we need? We need the yo form, of course. And if you go back to the chart a few pages ago and you see the yo form, it's just habría, which means I would have. This is the verb have in the would form. I would have, and then ir, we need to conjugate that in the past participle. That's just ido. Me habría ido, which means I would have gotten myself out. Or said much simpler, I would have left, or I would have fled, okay? I would have gotten myself out. So what about dormirse, to fall asleep? We know that se needs to be in the tu form, and that's just te. Then we know that we need a conditional form of haber, or a would have word, te habrías. And then what about dormir? What is the past participle of dormir? It's just dormido. Te habrías dormido. You would have, this is you would have fallen yourself asleep, or you would have dozed off, or you would have gone to sleep. And so finally we have lavarse. Again, same process. We know we need to take the reflexive pronoun, that comes first, so it'd just be se. Then we need to take our conditional perfect form of haber, which is se habrían. And then what about lavar? It's lavado, which is the past participle. Se habrían lavado. They would have washed themselves. Now, it's very important that you understand whenever you have a pronoun, it goes in front of your conditional verb. Notice how haber is what's in the conditional form here, and then over here it's just your regular verb that's in the conditional form. Whenever you have any kind of conditional verb, your pronoun me, te, se, nos, os, or whatever, all of that goes in front of the verb that is in the conditional, just so you know where to put it. Now let's move on. We have another case. That is with the direct object pronouns, okay? Your direct object is when you say it or those. Like in the statement, I would say it. It is the direct object. And you might ask yourself, well, gee, how can I tell when something is the direct object in a sentence? The direct object in a sentence is the thing that is being acted on. Like if I were to say, I kick the ball is being acted on, and so the ball is the direct object. But if I were to try to speak short and say, I kick it, now it is the direct object. If I were to say, I read the books, the books are what were being acted on, and so it would be the books is the direct object. But if I were to try to speak for short and say I read them or I read those would be the direct object. Just to make sure you understand what a direct object is in a sentence. It's the it or the those, the thing that is being acted on in the sentence. So, whenever you have a case where you have an it or a those in the sentence, or something like that, a direct object, your direct object pronoun always comes first and then your conditional verb. So in this case, the it would come first. And you know that it in Spanish is just lo, and then I would say. That's just diría. You're done. Lo diría. It, I would say, or translate it back in English, I would say it. So it's just important that you know that whenever you have an it or a those in the sentence, that always comes first before your conjugated verb when you're dealing with the conditional tense or the would tense. So lo diría, I would say it. When you're dealing with the conditional perfect, it's the exact same thing. Only this time, haber is what goes in the conditional, so that is what you put your direct object in front of. So, I would have said it. Your it, in this case, because conditional perfect is still a type of conditional. Don't get confused about that. So I would have said it. The it comes first, and it's just lo. Now you have your have that goes in the would form, which is what your conditional haber is. Lo habría. Why? Because it's I. It's in the yo form. Lo habría, now said, comes from decir, which means to say. Lo habría dicho, which means it I would have said. So it's very important just to remember that in a sentence, your it or your those goes in front of whatever verb is in the would form. It's very important to practice that just to make sure that you get comfortable with that. Now let's move forward. It's the same thing with your indirect object pronoun. And I don't want you to get confused with the phrase indirect object or direct object. Don't get confused at all. I will clarify. In a sentence, your indirect object is the person who is receiving the thing that you act on. Let me give you a few examples to make this clear. If I were to say, I give the book to John. Now, the book is what's being acted on. So the book is the direct object like we covered from before. But John is the indirect object because John is the recipient of the thing that I am acting on. Or if I were to say, she gives the food to her, then she is giving the food, but who's receiving the food? Her. Her would be the indirect object in the sentence. Or one third example. If I were to say, Goku threw the spirit bomb at Majin Buu, the spirit bomb is the thing that's being thrown or acted on, so that's the direct object. But who is the recipient of the spirit bomb? It would be Majin Buu. And so Majin Buu is the indirect object. So your indirect object is just your recipient in the sentence. And that is why your indirect object pronouns are to you, to him, to her, so on and so forth. Now, when you're speaking in Spanish, your indirect object goes first, then your direct object, and then your conditional verb. So you always put the recipient before the thing they're receiving, then you put the verb. Okay? A simple way to remember this is basically most of the time the indirect object is the who, the direct object is the what, okay? And people are more important than physical objects, so you put the person who's receiving it before the thing that they receive, okay? Just a shorthand way to remember that. So, in this case, what is our direct object and what is our indirect object? So you know your indirect object or your recipient goes first, and that is to you. This is our indirect object, okay? And how do you say to you in Spanish? It's te, okay? Now, that's informal. You could say, but that's for another lesson. So we're just going to keep it simple and do te for now. So te is to you. How do you say it? Because that's what comes first. Your direct object is your it. Lo, okay? Te lo, and then what is I would say? That's simple. Te lo diría, okay? Te lo diría. I would say it to you. Te, to you, it, I would say. So just remember, you put your recipient, then your thing they receive, then the verb. Very straightforward. Te lo diría, okay? Pretty simple. Now, the same is true of a conditional perfect sentence or a would have sentence. It goes your recipient, then what they're receiving, then your conditional statement here, which is the conditional form of haber, which is habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, then your past participle, okay? The statement, I would have said it to you, I'm trying to keep it simple, so I'm using pretty much the same statement. To you, of course, that's the recipient. That is te. It is lo. Now, what about I would have said? I would have said is a conditional perfect statement. It's a would have statement. You take your verb for have and put it in the would form. So it's habría. And then said in the past participle is dicho. Okay? Te lo habría dicho. Te lo habría dicho. To you, it, I would have said, or I would have said it to you. So remember, when you're making statements that have an indirect object and a direct object, put the recipient, then what they receive, and then your verb statement afterwards. And so those are very important rules to remember. And so now, to finish this up, we are going to practice with some drills. So I want you to copy these down, and then I have more I want you to copy down, and then we're going to go through them all together. So the first one, we would tell you. Y'all would eat the spicy tacos. Why would I lie to you? Wouldn't you worry about them? So these are the first four. Then we have 10 in all. So let's look at the other 6. I wouldn't have done it. They would have broken it. She wouldn't have said it to us. I knew they wouldn't have eaten it. He would have wanted to buy it. And finally, I would have told them that I wouldn't do it. So that's a pretty long sentence there, but it's okay. So before you get started on this, one thing I want to let you know is when you're making a negative conditional statement, would not or wouldn't, you just take no and put it in front of your would verb, and that's pretty much what you do. So I'm going to let you pause for a few minutes, work on these, and then we're going to come back and work on them together. Okay, so I assume that you have paused the video, that you have gone through these and worked on them. So now let's go through them together. So you know that these 4 are all in the conditional tense because it's just would, all right? There is no would have, so we don't need conditional perfect for these first 4. We would tell you. So you are the person who's the recipient, so you're the indirect object, so it's te, remember, because the person who receives it comes first, then the verb. Te diríamos, okay? We would tell you. You just put decir, which means to tell, and put it in the we would form. Te diríamos, all right? Y'all would eat the spicy tacos. Okay, so we know that the verb that we need here is comer, so comerían, or comeríais if you're being informal, it doesn't matter. This one is formal. You could say comeríais if you're being informal, but either way, comeríais or comerían los tacos picantes. Remember, you always, for the most part in Spanish, put your noun, then your adjective, all right? Why would I lie to you? See this to you right here? This is an indirect object because they're receiving. So what you would say is you would put that first. And that would go in front of your conditional verb. But first we need to put this upside down question mark and por qué, meaning why. Now we make this statement here. ¿Por qué te mentiría? Okay? ¿Por qué te mentiría? Mentir means to tell a lie. So you're saying, why to you would I tell a lie? Okay? So mentir, to lie, put it in the conditional tense, which is the I would form because it's why would I. So por qué te mentiría? Alright? And the te means to you. Wouldn't you worry about them? Now the verb worry here is actually a reflexive verb. It comes from the verb preocuparse. And as always, we take the se and we conjugate that first. So because we have wouldn't, this not ending right here, would not, you have to put the no first. So it becomes no. The you form of the reflexive pronoun se is te. No te preocuparías. Again, why? Because this is you worry. No te preocuparías sobre or de, doesn't matter, ellos. Okay, because we're talking about people that we're worried about here. No te preocupas sobre ellos or no te preocupas de ellos. You're more commonly going to find de ellos. Okay, no te preocuparías de ellos. Wouldn't you worry about them or you would not worry about them? So that is how you would conjugate in the conditional. Now, as you can tell, the rest of these are conditional perfect because we have this have here. Wouldn't have, would have, wouldn't have. See how we have all these haves here right next to the would? So we know the only thing we're putting in the conditional tense is the verb have, and then after that, we are going to put the other verb in the past participle. I wouldn't have done it becomes no lo, because remember your it has to come in the front. No lo habría hecho. I wouldn't have done it. No lo habría hecho. They would have broken it. Now the verb broken comes from break, which is romper. But you know that broken is the past participle, so it's roto, just R-O-T-O. Roto, it's irregular. So this becomes, remember, your it comes first. Lo habrían roto. Okay? This is the past participle of the verb romper, meaning to break. Lo habrían roto. She wouldn't have said it to us. This is a more complicated sentence. Why? Because you have your recipient here, you have an it, which is your direct object here, and then you have would not, okay? So you know you put a no in there somewhere. So your no comes first, no, and then remember, you put the recipients or the people before the thing they receive. So it's no, nos, lo, habría, because she wouldn't have, dicho. No nos lo habría dicho. Not to us it she would have said. Or she would not have said it to us. I knew they wouldn't have eaten it. Now, the I knew part is sabía que. Sabía que means I knew that. Saber in the imperfect tense. And if you need to know how to do the imperfect tense, I already have a video in our intermediate lesson on that, so just go watch it. Sabía que, I knew that they wouldn't have eaten it. Now, of course, because it's would not, we need to put the no first. Sabía que no, now we put the it, no, lo, they wouldn't have, habrían comido. Okay? I knew that they would not have eaten it, or I knew that not it they would have eaten. So remember, your no, then your lo, then your conditional statement, or your conditional perfect statement in this case. He would have wanted to buy it. So we have he would have wanted. Now in this case, you have an it right here, but guess what? Your it is attached to the infinitive of a verb. And when there's an infinitive right next to your it, you attach your it to that and not up here. Let me show you what I mean. He would have would just be él habría. Remember, this is would have. Wanted, this is the past participle. Querido, he would have wanted to buy it. Comprarlo. Remember, when you have an it right next to an infinitive verb or an unconjugated verb, you attach it at the end. So, él habría querido comprarlo. He would have wanted to buy it. I would have told them that I wouldn't do it. Now here we have conditional and conditional perfect. We have conditional perfect as a would have statement right here, and we have conditional as a would statement right here. I would have told them. Let's work on this part of the sentence first. Them is les, or to them, like you're telling something to them. They are receiving your words. Les habría dicho, which means to them I would have said, that is que no, remember your it goes first, lo haría. Okay, to them I would have said that not it I would do. Okay, this is from hacer. So don't confuse habría with haría. Haría comes from hacer, which means to do or to make. Habría comes from haber, which means the past tense have. So just to recap, just to make sure that you understand all of what I have just gone over, I just want to make sure that you understand that when you're making a would statement, you just take your verb and you add one of these 6 endings depending on who's doing it, unless your verb is an irregular from this list here. And then finally, when you're making a would have statement, you take the verb have, which is haber, and you put it in the would form, so that's would have, and then you add your past participle. I recommend the book 501 Spanish Verbs if you need to practice your past participles, but other than that, that is how you say would in Spanish. Alright, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll be sure to help you. Alright, God bless and Aprendamos Español.